So while folks are filling in the chat, wonderful. Thanks, Nina. Um, great. Like I said, I'm Ashley Ditton. I'm a managing researcher at Education Northwest. I've been working on issues related to high school alternatives for about three to 4 years now. Very interested in the work and really trying to dig a lot deeper into how folks are engaging with high school alternatives across the nation, and really seeing so much variance and so much difference that this work just really continues to be exciting and has a lot of questions for me left to answer. So I wanted to give an opportunity for the rest of our team to introduce themselves and be able to kind of hop on and see folks. And so we'll start with Ashley Shepard.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. My name is Ashley Shepard, and I've been at Ed Northwest for almost 2 years. I do a lot of work around technical assistance, with my specialty is really lying in the family engagement space. But I enjoy bringing folks together and creating a space where participants can learn and engage. And so I look forward to being able to help create that space within this work. So it's nice to meet you all.
I can go next. I'm Taylor Birch. I am a researcher with Education Northwest. I've been here a couple of months now. A lot of my work has to do with trauma-impacted students. Super, super excited to be here with you all today. Natalie, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Orozco. I'm a lead equity researcher. I've worked on education policy for about 15 years now, and my specialty is youth development, access to education and career opportunities, and the school to prison pipeline. Happy to be here with you all.
Hi, everybody. I'm Julia Petrocubi from Education Northwest. I'm based here in Portland, like Ashley, and I'm going to be supporting this project in a couple of different ways. My work focuses on youth development and youth re-engagement. I work a lot with OSPI and the Washington youth re-engagement work, and really excited about this opportunity to support you all.
Thank you all so much. You're going to be hearing me talk a lot during this webinar, but just know that this work is really backed up by a team of folks who are really invested in this work. So during this call today, we are going to do a few things. First, really going to introduce the State Action Collaborative and how this work of the scan of the high school alternatives is part of this broader project related to high school alternatives that's meant to develop the State Action Collaborative. Additionally, we're going to define high school alternatives. We found that this is difficult to do, and so this is one effort that has been really put forward by a group, and so we're going to kind of present that and hear some feedback from you all. Finally, we're going to share discuss findings from the scan and share our next steps with the work. So why are we here? So in 2021, the Annie Casey Foundation approached us wanting to ensure that high school alternatives had access to high quality educational and career pathways. We know that students have different needs to support high school graduation, different needs to support trying to get to high school graduation, especially students that are pregnant and parenting, students experiencing kind of a highly mobile environment, who maybe need additional income to support their families, or just simply not well served by traditional schooling. To address these needs, we know that communities, school districts, and public agencies need clear and practical guidance on how to improve the outcomes for young people whose needs aren't being met through the traditional high school system. So essentially, we need alternatives to traditional educational pathways. We found we didn't really know much about this complex and ambiguous field of high school alternatives, and also how best to support students. To address this lack of understanding, we developed this scan of the national landscape of high school alternatives that we'll review in this webinar. Taylor, if you want to drop the link to this in the chat, you'll be able to see what all we've done and get a little bit more of a detailed approach to this work. In addition to this scan of high school alternatives, we are in the process of developing a deeper policy and budget review related to high school alternatives. We're always open to hearing more about the exciting things that are happening in your state. And especially if you have something interesting, an interesting approach to supporting the budget needs of high school alternatives, please reach out to us. Our contact information will be provided at the end of this webinar, or you can, my email is part of the invitation, or we're on the website. There's plenty of ways to reach out. We'd love to hear more from you about what your state is doing to really dive into these budget issues. We'll also be presenting a webinar here in 2 weeks from today that will be talking about the things that we've learned so far in this work. That will be an iterative process. And so again, we'd love to get your feedback on what you're seeing and hearing. And then finally, this work is going to build out into a state action collaborative. So when conducting our work, we've heard time and time again that students, educators, advocates, and policymakers feel disconnected and unable to make lasting change. I think the word that I hear the most often whenever I talk to folks in this field is that folks feel like they're on an island, right? So to address this clear need from the field, we are cultivating the State Action Collaborative in order to bring together state officials, educators, policy advocates, and others to create an action plan and address policies related to high school alternatives. We're going to share more about that at the end of the webinar, but just kind of wanted to situate you in the full project before diving into the nitty-gritty of the work that we're doing around our scan. So going back to our scan, to the original item. So whenever we approach this work, we really started asking, what's working? You know, there's a lot that's working in high school alternatives and really a lot of bright spots in the ways that folks are engaging students. And so we wanted to ask what's working, what are the gaps in what's being provided to students, and then also what are the possibilities that we're going to be able to provide. So how we did it. We used the following approach to carry out the scan. So first, we developed a set of criteria for programs to include in the scan based on population and program interests of the Casey Foundation, the generous funders of this report, and a big thank you for their support. We then conducted a website and document review of programs that met our inclusion criteria. Next, we interviewed 19 national experts, researchers, funders, policymakers, and others working in this space, as well as 6 of our advisory group members. We discussed effective practices of high school alternatives, the conditions that foster success, and the funding and policy facilitators and barriers for these programs. We then administered a survey and conducted interviews with program leaders and their operators to gather information on the structure, effective practices, focused student population. We also asked program leaders about their program outcomes, their process for continuous program improvement, and policy supports and challenges. And finally, throughout this entire process, we have convened an advisory group to support the formation and direction of the scan. The advisory group was comprised of program alumni, so folks from high school alternatives that have successfully graduated and were able to give their perspective on those experiences. Program researchers, program leaders, policymakers, and they provided feedback throughout the entire project. The advisory group reviewed the scan at multiple key stages and engaged in facilitated discussion about the goals and challenges faced by high schools, alternative high schools. Excuse me. And so just a huge thank you to these folks for being willing to engage with us. And then also just a bigger thank you to all of the folks who engaged with us throughout the scan. Their insights were invaluable to being sure that we were able to produce relevant and meaningful findings to support student learning. And you can find more about who we talked to in the appendix of our scan. So the field of high school alternatives is rich with complexity and diversity in terms of the students served, the mission and goals, and educational approaches, as well as the funding sources and accountability strategies deployed by sponsors and regulating agencies. This abundance of approaches and models has led to a lot of confusion among practitioners, policymakers, and funders about what defines alternative school, which practices and models work well and for whom, and what funding policies and funding strategies are needed to serve students effectively and meet the growing demand for high quality pathways through and beyond school. To begin our scan, we developed a definition of high school alternatives in close collaboration with our advisory team. So at their best, high school alternatives are necessary because traditional systems, including school, workforce, post-secondary, criminal justice, and others, do not serve all students well or equitably. I think this is a founding principle of our work and something we want to make sure that stays central to the discussions as we work through this work into our state action collaborative is really focusing on the ways that students are not served well or equitably through traditional school systems and how high school alternatives can address those issues. At their best, high school alternatives provide high quality educational and career opportunities to empower students to overcome the systemic barriers that they face from traditional schools. And they also support flexible and asset-based learning opportunities that students find meaningful. One of the most adamant points made by our advisory team and many interviewees is that traditional schools have a lot to learn from successful alternative schools. So we really wanted to emphasize that all schools, alternative and traditional, should strive to be a place of building momentum. So schools should have a future orientation, providing not only a diploma and just, a sheet of paper, but also skills, connections to people and resources, certifications, and workforce preparation that provide future education and economic opportunity for all students. So really thinking about the ways that we can, that high school alternatives and then schools more broadly can build that momentum for students to prepare them for college and career success. Additionally, all schools should be nurturing healthy relationships with caring adults who affirm students' cultures, identities, backgrounds, and experiences and foster a sense of belonging. This is true for all schools, but especially in high school alternatives, given how often folks are coming from groups that are traditionally marginalized or, who may have struggled to fit in regular schooling, making sure that there's that opportunity for a nurturing, caring adult to engage. And finally, empower high quality, well-supported educators and practitioners to provide instructional and comprehensive supports that in turn empower young people to transform their lives. So really thinking about the fact that in the same way that alternatives shouldn't be seen as kind of a last resort or a place of sending students off to, but rather like an opportunity for students to get their needs met in these situations. We also think that the educators that are in these spaces should also be given the supports that they need to be successful in these spaces as well. At any point that you'd like to stop for questions or comments or anything like that, please pop in the chat. Taylor will also be interrupting me as needed to make sure that I see things. So feel free to drop anything in and let us know if you have any questions. So now we're going to our scan findings. Our findings were primarily organized into 3 buckets. We'll review each of the buckets, and as we go through each, please be thinking about what resonates with the work that you do in your local context. What are we missing that you would add to the discussion? And then what remains a barrier to supporting students in each of these areas? Excuse me. After each section, we'll have an opportunity to hear from you in the chat. So first, the ways in which people speak and think about students' diverse interests, experience, perspectives, learning needs, and assets directly influences student success and shapes the practice and policy environment that high school alternatives are situated within. We found that the greatest areas of opportunity were around changing the narratives and mindsets around high school alternatives. I think that these kind of have a knock-on effect with the practices that we saw, as well as the budget and policy implications, that really narratives and mindsets is a grounding issue that really impacts the rest of the approach to high school alternatives. So first, thinking about this as far as having high expectations for all students. My notes are off. Let me see if I do that, if that'll clear it up. It did not. Okay, well, we'll keep going. But yeah, so high expectations for all students. So, this quote from a program leader: when students come in, they often have beliefs that they can't achieve. And when you start to give some success, it really snowballs, right? And so really thinking about that for these students is making sure that, it's one of the most powerful things I heard lately was someone was describing a student experience, and they said, it really made a huge difference when I realized that it was traditional school that didn't fit me, not me that didn't fit traditional school. And so really thinking about that and that system shift where having high expectations for students to be successful really means being able to, look inward and see what students' passions and drives are, and then be able to cater to those and be able to push students forward to be successful in that way. And so really it's shifting that, shifting the view kind of, and really having those high expectations for students. So like I talked about with our advisory group, interviewees also said there's so much to learn from traditional school that traditional schools can learn from high quality high school alternatives. High school alternatives can really serve as sort of an incubator, allowing for innovative practices to be stress tested with students who may need additional supports. The best practices of high school alternatives reviewed in our other section really can be brought into traditional settings to support all students. It also really, with that, being able to have a full system transformation oftentimes will shape the need for a high school alternative, right? That students come in, if they come in feeling as if their traditional school system was supportive and they learned how to manage their emotions and engage in like social and emotional learning, and feel like they were engaged with a positive relationship with an adult, etc. If those things are in place, then that transition into a high school alternative can really hit the ground running for success, right? It can really allow students to focus on their, achievement, their kind of academic and career and college achievement, as opposed to really kind of trying to build the building blocks for engaging in that. And so that's why this like focus on full system transformation is so critical. Additionally, student advocacy and leadership is a key narrative and mindset shift. So while, students described the programs that were deeply invested in supporting student success, they also noted that many high school alternatives that failed to serve the interest of students can actually cause active harm to students and can re-traumatize and really be a harmful place for students to engage. So to address this challenge, interviewees really stressed the importance of advocacy for the rights of students to access a high quality education as key to overcoming deficit mindsets and protecting students from low quality alternatives. So in the chat, feel free to pop in when thinking about narratives and mindsets and what we just heard, what resonates with you, what would you add, and what really remains a barrier for your work. If anybody wants to raise their hand and come off mute and talk through any of these points as well, we'll have an opportunity to share out a little bit more later. But if you want to come off now and say anything as well, it's a fairly small group. I don't know that y'all can see the number of participants. I'm not sure how these work, but we can bring things off of mute. Great. We've got folks that are raising their hand. Taylor, do you want to take people off of mute?
Yep. I am going to. I think that Michael should be able to talk.
I can.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I guess what I'm thinking about as you go through sort of really the question I feel like was asked was, how do we identify alternative settings? Have you thought about sort of where these buckets are there components that are in like buckets? Like there's a part where we talked just now about population, the programs and the practices, which is one thing, and then maybe to go deeper in terms of the practices or the approach of the practitioners. So I guess what I'm trying to do right now is to sort of figure out, like I'm thinking on our end. I work at in Rhode Island Department of Education, and one of the things we're having a conversation right now are what are the criteria for defining what is an alternative school. So I'm wondering if in your work or in this work, because you just threw a lot at us, which is great, I guess what I'm trying to do is to organize it. So I
Right.
don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that yes, defining what is an alternative, like a high school alternative school is like an intense struggle because of the extremely complex policy environment of each of the states. So what qualifies as an alternative in each of those states becomes a very challenging array of possibilities and if it's charter environment or if it's embedded in the school district as a program or if it's in additional school within the school district or if there's just the list goes on based on what is most encouraged by the policy environment in each of the states. That said, when I think about the focus of this work, I would say that it's students who kind of define this, right? And it's programs that are meeting students where they are when they are kind of you can call it at promise, opportunity youth, or students who are somewhat at risk of disconnection from school and work. So those students who are not quite disconnected, but about to be, right? They're just kind of their chronic absenteeism is high maybe, or something like that. And so that's kind of the way that I framed this work, is really focusing on the student population, as opposed to trying to define the school itself, because I think defining the school itself is a challenge. Thank you. That's a good question.
Well, I'm going to just ask, maybe it's a clarifying question, because I feel like what I just heard is maybe there are two components. Number one is the population itself, right? So these are what we're talking about is like high percentages of at-risk students, and I know there's a whole piece in terms of how we define at-risk, but then there's a second piece that's about how, and I appreciate that, like school within a school idea, these alternative educational sites, how they approach their work with those students. Is that fair to say?
Yep. Yep.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Annie, I'm going to bring you off. Okay, you should be able to talk.
Super. Thank you so much. So I think one of the barriers for me, so I'm at the state education agency as well for Oregon, and there seems to be such a lack of real awareness among my colleagues at the Department of Education and really generally within the state of the importance of alternatives and really who the students are and what the alternative schools and programs do. And this comes up really most recently when we have conversations about accountability and accountability structures. And our state is looking at accountability writ large for the entire public system. And what I think they need to understand about accountability, particularly for our alternative schools and programs, is that, we have alternative schools that have, for example, 50% graduation rates, but students are coming to them at 18 with 16 credits.
Right.
Or at 19. I see that Scott Emmerich was one of your advisory board members, and I was formerly at a youth build program, and our average student was 19 and had 6 credits.
Right.
And so there needs to be shared accountability, right? So it's not just placed on the last place, the place where the student has success, but it needs to be, spread out among the entire system. And I think if we were to do that, we could be much more intentional about what kinds of supports could be put in place in the traditional system. Anyway, I mean, I have a million other things to say, but I guess that's just a barrier that comes up for me.
Definitely. I think there's like two conversations there. And I think that they're both things that we've really honed in on and really, again, when we look back around to that state action collaborative, or things that we're thinking of that folks may want to engage in, which is first communicating about the population, right? Like, there are states that you ask how many students are in an alternative learning environment in your state, and there's no ability to answer that question, because there's no tracking system in place. There's no there's no mark, in their student admin data. Like, there's no way to know that. And so, that's level one. But then level two is, like that, being able to communicate succinctly and clearly that issue, right? Like, that these students are coming in severely undercredited, or also facing like really big systemic barriers. And so have one student graduate in a 4, 5, 6 year graduation cohort is amazing, right? It's like wonderful, because for that student, that's a huge, could be a huge, overcoming so many structural barriers to overcome that. And so when thinking then about the accountability piece, there's several states that have done an alternative accountability model. I will say that oftentimes it has to go alongside traditional like ESSA-based accountability models. It has to be kind of a separate attack on and add-on. But it just helps them communicate better the ways that they've helped to to address these needs, either growth-based accountability models, or ones that focus on college and career readiness, or those kinds of things are embedded in the accountability models as one structure to kind of highlight the important work that folks are doing, while not making the only thing that's seen about them their graduation rate, or their student test scores or whatever that is. So I agree. I'm not sure if there was if you had any other questions or anything, but yes.
Thank you so much, Annie. Drew, if you'd like to expand on what you were sharing in the chat, feel free to raise your hand. I won't put anyone on the spot, though.
Thank you. This is great. And I really appreciate you coming off and sharing. That really helps. So we'll move on to our next section. And again, just keep raising your hands. This is really, really helpful for me as I think about these issues. So the next is effective practices. So high school alternatives typically embed certain evidence-based or evidence adjacent because there's still a little work done in this particular space, but effective practices related to student agency and interest, adult student relationships, educator support in their instructional and support model. So please note that in this section, especially, you can find more details about the citations that we've used in the report and those kinds of things in the actual report. So when we talk to interviewees, they emphasize the importance of student agency and interest to the success of students in high school alternatives. I think it's, yeah, on the wrong slide. Sorry. There we go. So this includes how student voice in programs is designed and implemented. While this is effective in all schools, students in high school alternatives often have really competing demands on their time and attention and make the bar for relevance really high, right? Like there needs to be a good reason for students who are in high school alternatives to come to school and to complete. Engaging students in their agency and in their interests can really be a good strategy for maintaining relevance. So this program leader really talked about, encouraging folks to be their best self and really see what they're capable of, having an additive, supportive environment. And then there's like a competency-based approach where there's like no failures, we don't give Fs. So they're really trying to let the student lead and be able to provide the support that they need to be able to see what they're capable of and not add kind of failure on top of those things. So here are some promising practices that build conditions to support student agency and interest. It's kind of a long list. It's, a lot of detail, but, knowing that students need safe and welcoming environments for learning, going back to kind of Michael's comments about where these are located. Sometimes these are located in somebody's dingy basement, with no windows and whitewashed walls and, those are not safe or welcoming environments for learning. And so having that is a really key important for making sure that students, engage their interests and really feel supported in the environments that they're in. Student identified learning and educational goals are critical to making sure that they stay engaged. Flexible and accessible credit accrual opportunities. We're going to go into this more in the policy section, but that can really help make sure that students feel engaged and successful in their programming. Differentiated instructional and comprehensive supports. So being able to provide what a student actually needs, where they need it. Oftentimes these schools or programs or whatever form they take are smaller. And so being able to provide that individualized approach and individualized attention is a key element to making sure that students feel as if their interests are being listened to. Relevant mentor-supported work experiences is a great way to build that career competency and be able to engage students in relevant activities that'll help prepare them for career success. And then extracurricular and leadership opportunities. I think oftentimes when students are engaged in high school alternatives, there's this idea that it just kind of just get the bare minimum out, but also a lot of the students that we talked to that were alumni of these programs said that their engagement with their leadership opportunities helped make sure that they continued to come. One student was a young mother, and you would think that the pressures on her time would limit those, but instead having these leadership opportunities and be able to engage in that really helped make sure that she stayed invested in the work and was able to finish with her her high school degree and a pharmacy credential at the same time. And next is adult-student relationships. We talked about this a lot, but relationships are particularly important for students in high school alternatives. Interviewees said a key program practice was providing students with opportunities to connect to caring adults who can build support to their goals. Building these relationships requires opportunities for regular positive connection, adults who can connect with students' lived experiences, as well as trust-filled and trauma-informed, healing-centered restorative engagement. So that end part was a lot of words, but just knowing that it's, leading with kind of a trauma-sensitive approach or, restorative approach to engaging with students is really critical. particularly in these environments. And finally, staff supports. So to implement effective practices for students, interviewees said staff members need access to a range of supports, including a positive, culturally competent work environment, access to professional development and learning. And it was, and context was really important for understanding how these practices were implemented. For example, education professional development should be catered to the specific curriculum, program model, and student population that the educator served. And they said that they really needed to connect with other educators in the high school alternative learning field to share lessons learned around these things and be able to dive in more deeply into those areas. We'll pause for comments on this one, and then we've got budget and practices coming up next. But for effective, or budget and policy, sorry. So effective practices, are there anything that folks want to comment about? What resonates, what you add, and what remains a barrier? Yeah, Annie.
Just relationship. I'm always floored by the lack of awareness of that for all students, and particular students in alternative settings.
Definitely. Yeah, we're especially thinking about that, I think, right now. I'm part of some work with the U.S. Department of Education is really putting forward this, effort around chronic absenteeism. Of course, they've got a challenge out right now where they're trying to get students to kind of say what gets them to come to school. And, as part of that work, that's something that I have a feeling is going to be really strong in the findings, is that students, relationships is really what gets them to come to school and gets them to engage. Drew.
Hi, just want to thank you guys for putting this on and putting it together. And it's really exciting to see where some of the new things have come along. It's as I think about the alternatives in Southern California and California, which has been my um, home for several years now, the scale of the alternatives from school district program to alternative independent study, which is kind of a fragment of leftover from the pandemic, serving a lot of students in different ways. And then alternative adult, let's see, community college, or like the state school and then university. There's really a scale of levels, and in part because of the size of the counties are really scalable, similar to the size of Oregon, for example, where Orange County, where I live, is about the same in size as the entire state. So the county offices play a really important role in identifying effective practices and pooling enrollment practices to make sure that students have choice. Because when you live in, a rural area, your choices are fewer.
Right.
Thanks for letting me share in.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. That's really helpful. Yeah, it's interesting. We'll touch on this a little bit coming up in the budget policy, or like the policy aspect of it, but the engagement of um, other systems of education, right? Technical colleges, adult education, et cetera. That can be a really powerful way to help make sure that kind of all students get access to the learning that they need. Because, yeah, right, providing a ton of different options for students whenever we know that this is a fairly small student population can be pretty overwhelming. But tapping into these other opportunities that are kind of adjacent to the work is really one strategy for making sure that, again, people like rural students get access to better opportunities. Yeah, it's excellent. And I keep moving forward with this, but again, everybody feel free to come raise your hand and come off mute if you want to have some more conversations. The next section, we're going to look at the last section in this before we kind of talk a little bit more and then transition into a conversation about the State Action Collaborative. But we're looking at budgets and policies. So high school alternatives really sit within a very complex policy budget environment. It's a mix of district, state, federal accountability rules, funding systems that really shape the perceptions of like the work of alternative schools and the perceptions about their effectiveness. So we've already touched extensively on this, but it's something that comes up all the time. You know, accountability for alternative schools really continues to receive a lot of attention, especially because alternative schools are often held to the same standards for test scores and graduation rates as traditional schools, as you know, Annie was talking about. And so these school measures do not adequately reflect the student engagement, academic growth, preparation for college and careers within alternative schools. So program leaders often suggest that policymakers would be better served using growth-oriented measures of student success, focusing on skills for future preparation or other strategies. Several states that are paying more attention to those metrics, including California and Colorado, are two that have a pretty good system in place that are pretty interesting. However, their alternatives may get stuck in alternative schools in other states may get stuck in a cycle of a school in need of improvement. And their state may then require like punitive measures every few years for not meeting those student achievement goals. So, and which is ironic for these schools, meaning those goals would mean that they're not doing their job, which is serving students, really focusing on students that are furthest from educational opportunity. And so it's this weird tension that that lies in these accountability models, that really these schools are there to serve students who are most credit deficient, kind of furthest from educational opportunity, and yet, still held to the same standards as traditional schools. We also heard a lot about the state policy dictates the upper age limits required for free education, with some exceptions for students qualifying for special education. And most states set this at 20 or 21. There's some states that are lower. Alabama is at 17. That's the last year that you have to provide free public education for a student. But some states have addressed this policy by extending the age limit. And for the word, in Texas, the age limit is 26, or was at the time of this report. And so most interviewees said that this would be a really critical aspect that would help make this change. Again, kind of tapping into what Drew was talking about when thinking about accessing other pools of funding and other strategies, was to be really able to like tap into students who are as old as 26 into these high school alternatives to get them a successful pathway to a degree. Another thing that was touched on within the policy or the practices was that interviewees said that policy requirements for credit accrual that are based on traditional school settings often limit the ability of programs to implement high quality, effective practices, things like flexible credit accrual, work-based learning opportunity, or competency-based credit accrual. So a few program leaders also noted policies around seat time limit their program design. So in other words, having to make sure that students are have a button the seat, excuse me, for a particular amount of time really limits the opportunities that they have to get creative for students. Interviewees said that state and district policies should be adjusted to align to allow for a flexible credit accrual. For this set of policies, though, it's worth noting that the concept of academic rigor often comes up when related to flexible credit accrual and college readiness. While our interviewees recognized the need to avoid falling back onto systems of like tracking with students, in other words, not preparing them for a college opportunity, There was also a recognition of the significant structural barriers that were in place for some students to complete a high school diploma, and therefore they often suggested that you need to have multiple pathways to graduation. So program funding is a complex topic with many facets that can either support or hinder student success. So for that reason, we're going to dedicate our next webinar to this topic, but more information will be provided at the end of this presentation. For now, we'll just say that there are budget approaches that like meaningfully weighted funding models, funding that follows the student to whatever school or school program that they attend, as well as resource allocations for whole child services, or wraparound services, work-based learning opportunity and industry credential opportunities. Those types of funding sources really make a world of difference in these settings. So we're going to go more in depth in the next webinar, but just noting that this is kind of part of this conversation. All right, so we're back to this conversation about what resonates, what would you add, what remains a barrier into these. And I'm seeing that we've got a lot of great discussions in the chat. If anyone wants to come off mute, or we can just go ahead and shift into taking about 5 minutes to talk about this, which is I'm really curious, what are bright spots in your state and what are a challenge? I'm seeing a lot of stuff come in the chat about bright spots and challenges, but if anybody else wants to come off mute, I'll hand it over to Ashley Shepard to kind of lead this discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashley. So yeah, I don't, the questions are there. And so we're really just curious to hear from you all. What's work that you're currently doing that you're proud of that's working well in your state? And alternatively, what challenges you're experiencing? Because again, our goal through creating this space is to have some time to think through how to troubleshoot some of those challenges and create some strategic plans to support your work. So if you'd like to come off mute, I'm happy to take off mute so you can share, or you can also drop some stuff in the chat. And Annie, I see your comment there. Is that a barrier that you're naming there? That schools are rarely named in legislation providing grants? Yeah. Go ahead, Annie, you can share.
Thank you. Sorry, I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking,
No,
but I appreciate the space. Yes, so I was going to say I was going to provide bright spots, but just really quickly, in Oregon, anytime there's new legislation providing new grants or new initiatives, alternative schools are never mentioned. And not just that, but our contracted community-based organizations that work with school districts to fill gaps that the districts don't have capacity for, they never receive additional public funding. So that's a huge barrier. I was going to say the bright spots. In Oregon, we have about 80 alternative schools, probably around closer to 100 including programs. That's a whole other story. Programs are invisible to the Department of Education because of a funny thing that we do. And there's such diversity in those programs, and they really do consider the local context. They consider the needs of the students in their areas. There are so many that have incredible career technical education programs. As I mentioned, I come from the Youth Build world, and Youth Build there are 2 Youth Build programs in Oregon, and they are certainly not the only ones that have really robust pre-apprenticeship construction programs. And again, just that relationship piece. I was just visiting schools this week down on the Southern Oregon coast, and it's always so inspiring. I've been out of the classroom for 8 years now, and I love getting back in there and just seeing these people who absolutely believe in these students who, from another perspective, might be quote unquote throwaway students, and they are helping them see how capable they are, how incredible they are, how worthy they are of all good things. And it's just so inspiring to see these young people change their lives and their communities by extension. Clearly I'm a true believer.
Yeah. When you care about kids and you're an educator, you got to care about all kids. And so when you you emanate that, right? And so I hear that coming from you. And I miss being in a school too sometimes. And I think what you're sharing too kind of elevates how do we create spaces everywhere for alternative schools, but even in our traditional K-12 schools where all kids feel like they belong and they can learn and can be successful regardless of what their interests are. Seems like it should be a simple, obvious thing, right? But it's not, unfortunately. Drew, you can go ahead and share.
Yeah, it's so exciting to hear this story about the student who kind of flipped their thinking about the school not fitting them rather than them not fitting the school. It's really encouraging. I also heard from some educators that because of the presence of educational failure, what the perception was that it was sometimes like raising the dead, that you were taking a student from a point of frustration and loss and grief to a point of success. And I think grit and persistence is part of that. Social emotional learning is part of that. Some examples in my mind, Coquille started and then closed, and I'm sure, and by using the names, I allow some conversations to happen, perhaps. The Jervis had a program behind, but then embedded it, but it was in the mod behind the high school. As they did some remodels, they focused on that in the remodel and put that first. Canby has done some really innovative things with Applied Tech Center when I was involved there, and then Silverton really set aside the alternative schools, embedded them in the high school. So that program occurred inside of the high school so that there was no, those students were part of the family. They were embraced and encouraged in a transition period where they went straight back to, in whatever transition process, to the classroom if there was a need for that, or other placements. So it's just there's such diversity, and it's exciting to hear that the work is continuing, and it's fun to see it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Drew. Anybody else want to share any last thoughts before we kind of move into next steps and what to expect? Yes, we will be sending out a link, a recording, as well as the slides for you to review. I think what we've heard is some great work is happening, which is exciting. How do we lift that up and inspire and get folks, behind supporting, put our money where our mouth is, right? And support this work to continue to happen and scale. And so with that, thank you all for sharing. I'll go ahead and pass it back to the other Ashley.
Hey, thank you. And if you come up with anything at any point, my door is always open. And so just be thinking about different things that you might want to share. And if it comes up afterward, happy to engage. So I just want to briefly touch on the State Action Collaborative we have coming up. So as promised, here's some information. We are going to have 8 states come together. We are trying to generate groups of about 3 to 5 representatives from each state. We want that to include someone from government, someone in kind of policy implementation side of things, someone in advocacy, someone in practice, but we're open to kind of different, the approaches different folks have to put together some teams. Happy to chat with folks who might be interested in doing this. The commitment is about a monthly 90-minute virtual meetings from November to April of November 2024 to April 2025. We'll provide one-on-one and group technical assistance, as well as $10,000 stipend to support the work. So these will be really opportunities for folks to come together and to develop an action plan. So the goal is to leave this with a distinct action plan on how to change policy associated with high school alternatives. And so that'll be an opportunity to network both with folks in your state as well as folks outside your state who are doing similar work, similar and different work around policy change around high school alternatives. So if this is at all interesting to you or if you want more information, so we have a website up, State Action Collaborative at it's ednorthwest.org. If you, Taylor, if you want to pop that in the chat so that folks can click on that. We have another webinar coming up in 2 weeks that's going to be focused on budget and policy and specifically budget orientations, as well as 2 webinars in which that'll be 2 weeks after that. That will be opportunities for you to tell us what you want to see out of the State Action Collaborative, what kind of cadence you want for the meetings, who you want to be involved, etc. Just come with ideas, and this will be a very collaborative meeting in which we'll share out what we think we want to see, and you can help shape the format of those coming up. We're also happy to provide technical assistance on building a state team, as well as answer any thoughts, questions, or comments that you might have at all. And so again, this is my contact information. My information is also on the site, as well as Taylor and Ashley's information if you'd like to reach out to any of us with any questions. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming. This has been a really great discussion, and the chat is just, I'm so excited to dive in more deeply. And I really appreciate the passion that you all bring to this work. And I am so excited to share that passion and be able to come together and make some change in this area and really see some difference. So thank you all so much.